All right, so now maybe a more grim question. So in Canada and in general, with public healthcare systems, there's an implicit trust that the government is not going to do anything bad
Yep.
or prosecute you for any information that you're giving up. When you go to the clinic, you are giving a lot of personal identifying information. So but that's based on the trust that right now the government won't do anything bad with it. In the future, however, you could have governments that are authoritarian in nature. What do you think these governments can do? What can be done now to maybe prevent such vulnerabilities?
If you're vulnerable with respect to health information, you're vulnerable with respect to an awful lot of other things.
Yeah.
The cameras that are around, police records, anything that's collected commercially. It's all if you've got a rogue government, if you've got a totalitarian government in place, you have healthcare information is only one of the collection of worries that you have. I don't know. I'd have to think about that some more. I don't think that we can plan our health information environment with that scenario in mind. I think what we do need to do is to build in protections for health information that are appropriate given the current environment that we're working in. Add understanding of the sensitivity of this information, strictures on where and when it can be shared and how it can be used. A careful thought about things like, all right, who gets to take this information and aggregate it for purposes of applying machine learning algorithms? But I don't think we can start now and plan for like a 1984 scenario because it won't work.
How would healthcare look different if there were no concerns for privacy from people? What do you think if there were no privacy legislations that we have currently? Because right now a lot of legislations provide a certain specialty towards healthcare information, like HIPAA in Ontario and Canada-wide. There are also similar legislations that basically give extra
protection to healthcare information.
Yeah.
Do you think with sort of open access in healthcare, would the immediate first step sort of be to sell it to big corporations?
I think that's a big move. I think the move from health information held within the public healthcare system to sale to court, like that's a great divide. And I would hope that Canadians would not allow that. Maybe the private healthcare system sits in the middle there and is a bit odd, but in the publicly funded healthcare system, my record stays within that system and should. I don't see the publicly funded healthcare system opening up the records to private corporations. The only possibility I would see for that move would be research related release of de-identified health information, which, as we've already talked about, is already in a kind of a gray area where we need to think about it. But I don't think it's going to happen in any other way.
For all the negatives that we've discussed of, the privacy concerns, do you think that the mass collecting of data is overall useful? Because it could be argued that a lot of this data that we're feeding in can improve, like decision support systems, for example.
Yeah, that's true. Look, I think big data analytics is around for a good reason. I think we learn a lot. I think that we're legitimately concerned about the quality of the data that goes in and the quality of the inferences we make over those data. I think we have to understand the limits of machine learning algorithms and the machine learning approach. We need to understand the limitations of the data sets we're working with. We need to understand that bias in a data set is going to be reproduced in the results of analytics over that data set. You can't escape it. But if you treat it intelligently, if you acknowledge these problems and think about them, then I think there's a great deal of potentially positive outcome for the assembly of large amounts of health information and intelligent use of that for decision support.
I guess right now, the managing of health information is limited to sort of the healthcare system, but do you think that in the future, with increasing sophistication with like consumer wearable devices, for example,
Yes.
and then even sort of, the introduction of the Internet of Things into the home, let's say, do you think that health information management will be a competency that every individual will now sort of need to know and learn?
I don't think so. That might be ideal. It's not going to happen. It's going to be a competency that it's going to have to be a competency that we develop somewhere across the system. We're going to have to empower people. We're going to have to saddle people. We're going to have to assign to certain, I don't know, there's going to have to be a role where your job is to think about and protect health information. The Internet of Things, Bluetooth or otherwise connected devices. Like, what about a hackable device? I mean, we need to think about that. We need to think about wearables. We need to think about the things that oftentimes slip under the radar, like wearables. You got the data. How's the data being transmitted? Where's the data being stored? And things that if it's all disaggregated, if the responsibility is disaggregated, things can slip between the cracks. So I think it makes a lot of sense to say, no, it's not up to the consumer, and it's not up to everybody involved in the system. It's a specified role that is a required role. Somebody who's expert in these things, security, privacy, property, like to think about what does this data look like? How's it moving? Where's it moving? Where's it stored? What are the vulnerabilities? What is the legislation? All of that stuff. Somebody needs to think about it, but not the consumer.
You mentioned that the onus should not be on the consumer, those concerns. So in democratic societies, people vote, and until this becomes an election issue, this might not be something that's really needed to be addressed, especially in the case of public healthcare, the specialty of such roles. So what do you think of that in terms of maybe there should be some onus on the consumer because ultimately
I didn't say it shouldn't be. Pragmatically, it's not going to work. It just is not going to work. I know this. You see it across the board. I interact with a device for a specific purpose. That purpose is not privacy. And this is not, it's a reality. It's not a shortcoming. So, we've done all kinds of work on privacy policies. You can walk into any room you want and put up and say, the last time you installed an app, did you read the privacy policy? I'll guarantee you nobody in that room, including the privacy advocates, will have read the privacy policy. Does that make them dumb? No. Does that mean we have to educate them? No. Because in some sense, it's like, I got so much to do already. I must, as a consumer, be able to offload some of that to somebody who knows more about it than I do. And that isn't to say that those actors are always going to have my best interests in mind. Of course they won't. But the responsibility to ensure that simply cannot be disaggregated to every single consumer. It's not going to happen. And it shouldn't, I think.
Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to get out to our listeners?
Well, so you raised something about, you talked about regulation, and that you were asking me about, don't you think there's some responsibility for consumers? And I've been thinking about privacy for a long time, and it seems to me where the role of, not consumers, but the public is legislation, regulation is in part responsive to, must in part be responsive to the public. Yeah. So I think while each one of us as individuals cannot be held responsible for protecting our own privacy, I think that is just a fundamental error. Yeah. There is a role for an informed public in making electoral decisions, in making, in understanding what sorts of issues can be brought to bodies like the Privacy Commissioner. So we do need to understand what's at stake. And we do need to understand the kinds of decisions that our governments are making for us. So, for example, Canada's going to have to wrestle with the question of a right to be forgotten at some point. If it's in the EU, it's coming. I think we need to really think about it. What do we mean by that? Do we think we should have it? What would it look like? And not to say that the opinion of any individual member of the general public is going to hold is going to hold and as an individual thing influence government decisions and regulatory frameworks. But as a collective, we do. And I think that is our responsibility.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.